searching history for buried classics. This is Lost Treasures of Gaming.
Welcome back to Lost Treasures of Gaming. I know, it's been a few weeks, but that is the joy of having an interview show. We can't always get somebody on the show, but welcome back. We are happy to be here. I am one of your hosts, Sean Evans, otherwise known as Zion Tane everywhere.
And I'm your other host, Sid Bolton, known as Dirk the Daring. I'm also your gaming archaeologist, digging up these lost treasures for you on a almost weekly basis. But the thing is, Sean, at least if people are discovering us later on, they're just going to go, from one episode to the next episode, so they won't realize that there was a little bit of a gap in between. But that's okay. I think it was worth it for us to unearth a treasure for this week, for sure.
Yeah, this week we're going to be talking about Forbidden Forest for the Commodore 64, which came out in 83, is that right, Sid?
And it was also available on the Atari 8-bit computer as well, and but the Commodore 64 version was where it was developed, and for me, it was one of those games that I really enjoyed. I was just a youngin' at the time when I was playing that game, but it had so many unique things about it, and certainly it left a lasting impression on me. So really fun today to talk to the gentleman behind the game.
Yeah, so we're going to be talking to Paul Norman tonight. But Sid, when you told me we're going to be interviewing Paul and we're going to be talking about Forbidden Forest, I remembered the title, but I couldn't remember the game. So, of course, the internet is full of these. I figured YouTube's going to have a video. So I went to YouTube and I watched a video of it, and as soon as the music started playing, it was just instant. I'm like, I remember this.
Yeah, and the music was definitely a big part of it, and we'll get to find out kind of a little bit more about why that is so important, and how it all came together.
Yeah, I mean, Paul tells us some interesting stories about how the game came together and why the game had sort of had things in it that other games of the time didn't. So he kind of took it to whole new levels, kind of beyond what games were back then, and he kind of explains why he does that and why he did that, like where his passion came from. Really, he's a funny guy. Great listening to these stories, and it was a pleasure having him on. So without further ado, here is Paul Norman, the developer and creator of Forbidden Forest for the Commodore 64. Paul, welcome to the Lost Treasures of Gaming. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Glad to be here. How are you guys doing?
We're doing well, thank you. So we want to talk to you today about a very old game for the Commodore 64 called Forbidden Forest. And Forbidden Forest has an interesting origin story. Would you mind kind of going through the story of how it came to be and how you got the job at Cosme?
Well, it is a very old story, and I hope I can remember it. But it's like it was yesterday. I had discovered, after being a guitar player for 20 years, I was a victim of disco. So I happened to be in a Federated music store one day and discovered the VIC-20.
The lovely VIC-20.
That little 5K wonder machine.
That's where I learned how to program.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure that it made quite an impact. It certainly did on me, because I spent the next couple of months doing little else but walking around and trying to make a few things and learning basic programming. So I happened to come across a newspaper ad for game programmers, something I'm not sure I even knew existed at the time, but I decided, what the hell? Unfortunately, it was about 50 miles away from me, and I didn't have a car. So I rented one and took my little efforts and my little VIC-20 out there to Westlake Village, which is up past Topanga Canyon, if you know the area, Malibu. And there were a couple other guys there showing some rather crude, simple concepts that they'd done, such as blackjack and pretty basic stuff, considering it was done in BASIC. And I, being generally more ambitious in my creativity, I had done an asteroid game, and with a rocket, an asteroid, and then really tinkered as much as possible with the BASIC to make it look like it was moving fast and blowing up and stuff like that. Anyway, by comparison, I guess I impressed, and the man at the company called Synchro, a little hole-in-the-wall operation out there, hired me. Fortunately, the salary would just cover the cost of the rent-a-car, so I could take the job.
Oh, man.
And when my first day, I arrived and was put in a little windowless room with a couple of aged aerospace engineers behind me, and was presented with a Commodore 64.
So you were the young whippersnapper in the room.
Well, I was reasonably young. I had been doing other things for a while. I wasn't in the ranks of the 17-year-old programmers that seemed to dominate the world, but I guess still do. But in that room, yes, I was the baby. And so I got the Commodore 64. I got a book on 6502 machine language programming, which I'd never heard of, and jumped in. I asked if they had something in mind, and their suggestion was, how about something with a bow and arrow? No problem. Not a problem.
I guess that's how games were made back then. Let's just do something with a bow and arrow.
Yeah. It's, we got the guy down the hall is already working on the Frisbee game, so why don't you do the bow and arrow? And, okay, well, I'm much more and always have been a movie buff than a gamer, so naturally I'm thinking cinematically, bow and arrows, Robin Hood, Forrest, and it's a game, so I guess monsters. So you got a forest with monsters and a bow and arrow. But I didn't know anything about machine language, so it was all of the first month or so was all about trial and error, and asking a few questions of some of the other guys. I remember my first question was, how do you do a delay? It was all totally Greek to me at the time. But a month or so, I had laid out some grass and some trees, and the Commodore 64 had this revolutionary aspect of sprites, that little independently programmable things that you can make out of 16 pixels, and I had this brainstorm. Well, if I make a couple of big trees on the background and then make slightly smaller trees out of sprites which I can move, I can make it kind of scroll in 3D.
So you basically created parallax scrolling.
Well, I certainly hadn't seen it myself, and from the reactions I got from people walking by, I guess it wasn't all that widespread at the time. But see, I'm thinking, this is not a computer. This is not, I'm not at a bar playing Pong. This is a movie. I make movies. This is what I think. I think in terms of movies, and movies have depth and motion, and so you have to do that. And so I just keep plodding away on, putting the XOX and the AO5 and branching to whatever the hell all this mnemonic nonsense I was learning led to, and as I all was pun bit by bit. It built up, and I got a few monsters in there, and of course, my entire life prior to that being a musician, it's got to be full of music, because movies are at least back then, were full of music. I mean, music was the emotion of the movie, so I had to figure out the SID chip, and that was a chore, because you've got basically a whistle, a kazoo, and some sort of ship alarm sound.
Not a whole lot to work with.
Yeah, so I got to make music with it, but music is an amazing thing that lends itself to so many channels and possibilities that if you listen to it today, by comparison, it sounds a little weird, but at the time,
the time was great. Now, you said you were a musician before becoming a programmer?
Yeah, I picked up a guitar at the age of 13, and I'd already become enamored with the motion picture soundtracks like El Cid and King of Kings and the whole Miklos Rosa catalog, and that sort of sound. So I then one band led to another, and blah blah blah, and so I playing guitar for the next 25 years.
So you were right at home then when it came to having to write music for your game.
Yeah, everything in with one or two exceptions, just almost filler. Everything in Forbidden Forest and pretty much every other game I wrote, it was music I had written in some cases years before. Just to mention another game, the main theme for Aztec Challenge, which followed,
yes,
was the very first melody I ever wrote. I was like 14 years old. So I get my inspiration from my own history.
I remember Aztec Challenge very fondly as well.
I'm glad to hear that. I do get those two, Forbidden Forest and that one. I do get the majority of my emails. So anyway, the game is progressing pretty well. When I start to notice that the furniture at the company is slowly disappearing around me.
Okay.
And people are disappearing, and
you're just so engrossed in programming that you're not really noticing, but finally people are gone,
Can't bother. I'm busy here. I'm got my nose in this little machine. But it turned out that someone was buying the tables and chairs and desks and computers as this poor little company was going out of business. And it turned out to be George Johnson, who owned Cosme. And he saw me programming away as they dismantled the room around me, and said, "We'll buy him too." Throw him on the pile with the folding table.
How much does he cost? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, I went to his elaborate mansion in what is it called? San Marino, Pasadena area, and 4 or 5 other guys that they had hired. They ran They ran an operation of making cassettes, audio cassettes.
Oh yes.
And I guess the natural transition to put games on cassettes at the time. So they started hiring guys, and we all demoed our whatever we had over at his house one evening. And one of the owners of that company, had a big smile on his face and was nodding when as soon as I let the monster hit the bow and arrow guy and blood started splattering around. He said, I hope you got something here. So, but it was amazing good fortune for me at the time, because they didn't have an office. They said, you work at home, we pay you, you make games.
Nice.
Go for it. And that's exactly what I did for about the next 7 years.
Oh, wow.
It was like a dream come true at that point.
I am not an office guy.
No.
I'm not a corporate cog. I have managed in any other operation. I've only gotten involved with company type places a couple of times in the interim, and I've always managed to talk my way back home with these people, because it's just first of all, I work from like 2 p.m. to 4 a.m., that sort of thing. I always have.
Yeah.
My fifth grade teachers used to say, have you been crying? Your eyes are all red and puffy. No, I am up all night.
Now, one of the things you did in Forbidden Forest 2 that I think was possibly a first for the time was the way you actually changed the volume of sound as the creatures got closer to you, more specifically the bees. So as the bees got closer, the sound became closer or louder, as if it was moving towards you. That was definitely not something you would see normally in a game.
Well, that's good. I'm glad to hear that. I'd actually forgotten. But as I said, I'm not making video games. I'm trying to make a movie. And so I'm trying to do, anytime I find a trick, and being lazy, I always try to find the simplest trick possible that I can do something that has a really obvious effect. If I just put this number here and delay it for 10 seconds and then put it over here, and people can actually perceive what has happened here, and that's what I always go for. It's like playing the guitar. My programming is very largely ad lib. I'm not a hardcore programmer. I tinker until it works.
Yeah, well, it was amazing that you had kind of stumbled across a couple of things that were, I don't remember games having a day and night cycle at that point, which yours had, and certainly the dynamic sound was something that was very impressive and quite different for the time. Do you remember the kind of the inspiration for the, I don't know if you call it a victory dance or what you would call it, but after you would defeat all the enemies in an area, of course the music would change and you'd get sort of a victory tune and a little dance. What was the inspiration behind that? Was it just you wanted to reward the player for finishing the level, or what was your thought there?
I think the dance, the concept of giving a reward at certain points, which generally was like a pop-up score or, a balloon bubble with 200 or 300 or something like that would happen, or just a sign that say, good, you're going to the second level. I think my inspiration was, again, in keeping with me, I had the music first. And the music was another old piece that I had written years before, originally called Circus, because it had this kind of a calliope, 3x4 thing going in the background. And it lent itself well to the SID chip because of these 3-note sort of fugue thing, one going da 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 da, and the other playing a tune, and the other playing a bum bum bum, a calliope bass. And the music itself says dance. You got it. So, and what's the guy going to do? Stand there?
Right.
And again, it's going for simplicity. I just took every move that it was already programmed for the archer and just ran them all together at random very quickly. And that was the dance.
Right.
I didn't have to do any extra work, and people seemed to enjoy it.
Well, the music for me has still stuck with me in my brain after all these years. Every once in a while, I would go back and either watch a YouTube video or actually play the game, and I'd get to those points, and that music is very, very familiar to me. Like I said, it has stayed with me. So that in itself is impressive to me, and I'm sure I'm not the only person that has that. So a very catchy tune in that, and of course many others along the way. So you ended up suddenly being an employee of one company, and then now you're an employee of another company to get the game done. What was the response after the game started selling? Did it sell well for the time? Was it well received by the press? How did it make you feel at the time?
I'm kind of insular in my sensibilities of the world around me, so that I got impressions here and there when I went down to the factory where they, boxed everything. And I got the impression that the Forbidden Forest had, surprised them in its reception, especially in Europe. Because they had been, just starting out and fairly low level activity. So, I was, before you knew it, I was getting interview calls from London and Germany. Just something about, it's easy to see in retrospect that the whole forest concept has a very obviously a European feel about it that the Europeans could respond to because they live in it. And so I guess that did very well. And at the time, I was just getting a salary, so nothing particularly changed for me. Although they did threw me a few bonuses here and there, that sort of indicated to me that things were going well for them. And the next, I had like half of Forest done by the time I joined Cosme, so I finished the other half and fairly quickly, and jumped right into the next one, which less of a European theme, but it also did very well, Aztec Challenge. And what was it? There was a couple in between, little ones, Slinky maybe, or Caverns of Kafka.
Caverns of Kafka, I remember that.
Slinky, I think I was just doing filling out their catalog because they'd done the Atari version or something. So I more or less did a port for Commodore 64, and my only contribution there was to use John Philip Sousa marches for the reward screens. Because again, I guess you've got to have music. What's wrong with movies today? There's not enough music. But anyway, I think it was by the time we got to Super Yui that we really hit the. I'd go down there and one of the guys in charge of shipping or something said, "So where's the new car?" So I guess things were doing well up to that point.
Did you have any involvement in the sequels to Forbidden Forest?
Depends on what you mean. Forbidden Forest 2 was mine.
Okay.
Anything after that, no.
So that was beyond the Forbidden Forest?
Beyond.
And in that one, you now allowed the player to essentially not just sort of be locked at the bottom of the screen, but to actually walk out more so into the forest.
Right. I thought that was the next natural step. You're going to have a 3D forest. You ought to be able to move in it. So it took a little mental gymnastics to get the sprites to go on and off at just the right time. They were, how did it work? They just had like 8 layers that you could place sprites because they had 8 sprites.
Wow.
So flip between the character and a tree if the tree was in the front, and then you flip back and put the tree in the background again. And you figure out how to do that on the fly, and plus making him a little smaller each time. Trickery, all just a sleight of hand.
It's all magic.
Yeah.
It's all magic. So going back to the original Forbidden Forest, how long were you actually working on that before it was released, before it was done?
I think the synchro period was probably 2 months, and I finished it up for Cosme in another month and a half.
Wow, that was so pretty fast, actually. So all of that, everybody disappearing around you was within 2 months of you starting working for them.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I don't know why those guys got into this, but a number of other companies were popping up around whose names escape me, but I mean certainly Atari was going with.
Just a little outfit called Atari?
Yeah, one of the dumbest. But there were a number of them. All the names are gone for me. But sometimes other guys would walk through the room and say, "Hey, I was just over at Dino Games or whatever," and I was interviewing over there, and they said, "Who did that Forrest thing? You know him? Can we get him over here?"
Nice. You became known as the Forest guy.
I'm the Forrest guy, yeah. Better than Forrest Gump, I guess.
Maybe. So where does life find you now, Paul? What is it that keeps you busy these days?
Well, work-wise, I do web stuff for people on an independent basis. From time to time, I cut video for some people. I work up systems. I did doing a system for a Hollywood management company, and individual websites for certain people.
So definitely not in the gaming industry now.
No. I wrote a script, a movie version of Aztec Challenge that I'm trying to run through development.
Very cool.
See what happens there. And otherwise, I have my little studio and make music and watch movies.
What about a Forbidden Forest soundtrack or a remix? What do you think about something like that? Would you ever consider doing something along those lines?
I think there are other people. There's a guy in England, I don't know if you've heard it, he's going around for Back in Time.
There's always a guy in England.
Yeah.
There's always one guy that is into doing that stuff.
If I was only any good with names, I'm always asking people, that movie with that guy with...
Yeah, that's why the IMDb was created, I think, exactly for that situation.
Yep.
Now, I know you mentioned that you didn't really have anything to do with later versions, so the 2003 sort of remake of Forbidden Forest, that was nothing to do with you then, other than it being based on your original concept, correct?
Absolutely. No, my ties with Cosme ceased around 1990.
Okay.
So anything after that would be theirs or others' work.
It still amazes me that they're still in business today because they've just, as so many companies from that era, and of course they've changed and a different company today, but it still amazes me that they're still around. And in some ways, I'm sure I imagine they seem like the kind of company that if they could repackage your old Forbidden Forest somehow and resell it, they would try to find a way to do it, I'm sure. But you were also responsible for Super Huey, which was another big Cosme title, as I recall. So there's quite a few home runs you had for them back in the day. So it must have been pretty interesting time period, but
the first half was quite rewarding for them and enjoyable for me. The second half, we've talked about the music and these things, and when my interest flips, I usually go in a completely different direction, and I just got into simulations. Where I didn't want to do movies anymore. I wanted to do actual things that actually happen on computers and let you play with them. And so, I did a nuclear power plant simulation. I did a DEFCON 5 Star Wars simulation. And being a purist and a realist, those can't have music. And so I think, although I found them very interesting and challenging to work on, I don't think there was the public or Cosme, for that matter, really got the concept that it wasn't really pop entertainment anymore. It was quite literal and, for me, dramatic, but in a very serious way. And so things started to slow down a bit in that arena, but I found it very interesting. The soundtrack for my nuclear power plant was a low hum. Bells, whistles once in a while, but that was the entire. But one guy did email me somewhere in the interim, said he plugs his Commodore into the stereo and in the dark and cranks up this hum and sits there before the power plant screen and watches the lights and the warning messages and stuff come up for hours and hours and hours. It's the same reaction I had. It's kind of tranquil and tensing all at the same time.
Very cool. So, Paul, how can people follow you on Twitter or get more information about you somewhere, about all the games you've worked on back in the day?
Not that I know of.
Okay.
Well, at least he's honest. Hey, I had a hard time tracking him down, so there you go. You're fairly, well hidden in there, you might say, on the web, but that's okay. That's okay. So but it sounds like we actually heard you a little bit earlier playing a little bit of music. So you're obviously your first love, as you mentioned, since you were young, is music, and that seems to have stuck with you. So that's great. And even though it seems like your time with video games is over, but never forgotten for sure. I just loved your work and always have been a fan, and it was a pure pleasure talking to you and getting some insight from you, and I just want to personally thank you for those experiences. I was probably around 12 years old when I played Forbidden Forest, and spent many hours with it, and of course some of your other titles, and Aztec Challenge as well, and I even bought, I know you weren't directly involved, but there was I believe that they at least asked your permission about doing the 2600 version of Aztec Challenge, which was kind of an interesting remake many years later on a machine that had less power even than the Commodore 64. So it's kind of interesting when we go backwards with these things, but anyway, I just wanted to personally thank you for Forbidden Forest and your other titles. They were certainly very entertaining to me when I was younger.
Well, I did it to entertain myself, so I was 12-year-old sitting there right there by you. That's why I randomized as much as I could so I could play the damn thing.
Right.
Nice.
And other guys, they make games that they know everything's going to happen. They can't play them. I wanted to play it, so I just I was a fan of myself.
Yeah.
Right along with so, but I appreciate hearing that.
And I'll tell you, a lot of people that come through the Personal Computer Museum, I have a nice boxed copy of Forbidden Forest in there, and a lot of times it's out in the display piece. And I can't tell you how many people have come through and say, "I remember that game. I used to play that game." And a lot of them, they remember different aspects, but the music certainly was a big part of it, and that really shone through in the final product, and it's probably still what makes it such a great lost treasure today.
Well, I always like hearing that. That would come first. But,
So, can you still play that music on your guitar?
oh, I can ad-lib pretty much anything, I suppose, but mostly it's memory. I guess it's like something like that.
Awesome.
If you want to hear a slightly updated music from a game, I did a Flash version of Aztec Challenge, which I put up online for anyone to enjoy as they will at aztecaqueen.com.
Awesome. We'll put that in the show notes.
Go in there and play and listen to a somewhat more produced soundtrack.
Great. Oh, I think I found it. Yes, I think I did.
Well, if I keep up the domain name, it should be there.
Awesome. Well, Paul, thank you so much for being on the show. It was awesome to hear about the history of this game and how it all came to be. We appreciate you taking the time out of your day to speak with us.
No, thank you. Thanks for the kind words, and I'm glad somebody enjoyed it.
Lots of people
enjoyed it. Exactly.
Very cool.
All right. Well, thank you again.
All right.
Well, was that everything you could have hoped for, Sid?
Absolutely. It was difficult tracking him down. He's not someone who really, unfortunately, stayed in the video game business, but he's still around, so that's great. And we got to talk to him about what a interesting story. Can you just imagine, sort of tables and chairs and desks sort of disappearing around you while you're so involved with what you're doing that you don't realize it's happening. So that was kind of a unique story, and I don't think too many people know that story. So
he started telling that, and I'm like, this sounds like an episode of The Twilight Zone.
Exactly.
Everybody's just. Wasn't there a Star Trek episode called Remember Me?
Where
that was happening, and Beverly. Everybody
around
around Beverly was disappearing, and nobody knew who she was talking about.
Yeah,
And
it's also a good point with him, too, that I really do believe in what he's done and the games that he worked on, because there was a bunch, beyond just the Forbidden Forest, including Beyond the Forbidden Forest, but that were very visionary in terms of, how he really had this idea of melding together movies and video games, and he was doing that at a time that was quite early on, and it's one of those things where, and you may have heard this in business as well as in video games, it's not always the pioneers that end up sort of, reaping the rewards from their ideas, but he certainly paved the way for other games, and in a lot of ways, the way games are made today with dynamic music and all these other things about them and sort of a story behind them. And so he was really onto something at that time, even if he didn't really fully grasp that he was.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he definitely had some firsts for what, as far as he knew, they were first. Like the parallax scrolling was not something he had heard of. He just kind of did it.
And you have to remember too, right? It would have been a much different world back then. There would be
for sure.
So he would be working in isolation. So And the fact that he came up with a lot of these things on his own, it's pretty amazing stuff. And so I'm really glad that we got to talk to him. And he certainly has, left an impression with me and with many gamers elsewhere, I'm sure, and has definitely produced an amazing lost treasure.
Absolutely. Well, it was definitely a pleasure talking to him. And I understand we have some exciting guests coming up soon. Are we going to say it all or give some hints as to who we might be getting?
I think we should just have people keep tuning in because we've got some interesting people lined up for sure that have created some pretty amazing games, and I know I'm excited about what we've got coming up soon. So stay tuned, and we may not bring you an episode every single week, but boy, when we do, it's going to be somebody great.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, thank you everybody for listening to this episode of Lost Treasures of Gaming. Every Friday, go ahead and visit gaminghistory101.com, where Fred is going to produce a video playing and talking about the game that we just talked about. So every Friday he's going to have a new video there to coincide with what we have done. You can follow this show on Twitter at Lost Treasures OG, and you can follow me pretty much everywhere as Zion-Tane.
And if you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm at Sid Bolton. That's Sid with a Y. And if you want to send us an email, maybe give us an idea for a game or a guest that we should have on the show, or you just want to give us some amazing feedback, tell us how wonderful we are, please send us an email to losttreasuresofgaming@gmail.com. You can also listen to our parent show, the OMG Hour, and whether you want to read game reviews or anything else, you can go to omgnexus.com. All of that stuff is there.
All right, so be sure to listen to the next episode of the OMG Hour to get a preview of what we might be talking about next week. Thanks, everybody, for listening.
See you soon.
This has been an OMGNexus.com production.